Okay, so we're looking now at the opening, the very first section of the poem. Now, the very first things that will strike you when you read this first line of the poem, they picked a canny up one morning. Of course, first of all, we have this impersonal description of the subject through this pronoun. So this impersonal pronoun makes the police vague and adds to the sense of mystery and suspense in the poem. We don't know who this is yet. They picked a canny up one morning. Obviously, importantly, we have throughout the poem terms of word choices. The first name terms of friends or relatives. First name terms which suggests intimacy in some way. So there's this suggestion that the people that are carrying out this atrocity are vague and mysterious, and that the people that it is being carried out upon are either friends or relatives of the speaker, because it's the speaker that is the subject of this poem more than anything else. What you will also notice, just in terms of the tone of this opening description here, the tone of this opening description is very neutral, which I think comes up from the word or the phrase picked up one morning. It sounds fairly genial or beneficent. This is a moment that seems relatively, harmless. They picked him up. It's like, something you would say about a friend for school. They picked me up one morning. And so what we see in the beginning, in the speaker's perspective, is naivety. So the speaking voice here is a neutral genial, and it shows his naivety towards this particular subject. And then we have the second line, where suddenly we have the change. It beat him soft like clay. I think this is a really powerful simile. We know that this is the morning. We know that this is happening in broad daylight. So they've beaten this man like clay. Now the phrase here, like clay, particularly creates this sense of lifelessness, that they've beat him to this malleable, manipulable pulp, that he's lifeless, malleable, and dehumanized by this particular description. He becomes inanimate. He becomes, one step above mud. He becomes clay instead of a human being, and he is like clay or putty or something soft, moldable in their hands. It gives them an enormous sense of power over him. And then they stuffed him down the belly of a waiting jeep. Now, there's a number of different figurative devices going on here. We can call this personification, which it is in a certain respect, because humans have bellies. But it's deliberately making it sound like the jeep is either some kind of animate being, a human, or an animal. And so if it's a human, we call it personification, but if it's an animal, we call it zoomorphism, which may be a term that you've never heard before. But it's giving this sense of the jeep consuming him, i.e. he went in there and he never came back. He was stuffed down the belly of a waiting jeep. It makes it seem like a predatory animal, if you read it as being an example of zoomorphism. And it's a waiting jeep. And this personification of the jeep, it's waiting, makes it makes the human element behind this faceless. We don't know who it is that's carrying this out. And so that again adds to the sense of mystery. The fact that it's the jeep that's waiting personifies the car, but also gives us this sense of facelessness, that this violence is being carried out, and the people that are experiencing it don't really know who it is that's doing it to them. And so that's partly what allows the speaker to react in the way that we see here. What business of mine is it? So we look at this phrase, And there's nothing unusual in figurative language here. But what business of mine is it? Shows us, I think, the speaker's effort to reassure himself. It's self-reassurance that he does not need to react in any way to these acts of atrocity. That there's no need for him to react to this. What business of mine is it? He's trying to reassure himself at this moment in time that he is right not to react to this. So long as they don't take the yam from my savouring mouth. And so there's some really interesting things going on here. I think the yam here is almost symbolic, because it is, in many parts of Africa, the kind of food of life, the staple. And so, if you can keep people needing the yam, you can keep them reliant upon food, you can convince them to be passive, and you can convince them not to take an interest in their fellow citizens. I think all of that comes from this. In this case, it's an adjective, but it's a verb that's used as an adjective. Savouring, sense of desperate or desperation and hunger in this particular line that gives us, I think, this is what gives us the explanation of why the speaker is passive. He takes no, or he convinces himself that it's okay to be passive whilst you're watching people that you know on first name terms be beaten to a pulp and then stuffed down the belly of a jeep and driven away. So that's the opening here. What we're trying to think about then is the poet's purpose. Now this is a really interesting poem to talk about the poet's purpose, because the speaker in this poem and the poet are very, very different. The poet is deliberately distancing himself from the speaker in this poem in order to criticize the speaker. So the poet's purpose here, I think, is originally to show us the naivety of the speaker and to show us to criticize the speaker's passive attitude, the speaker's passivity in response to these threats to his close friends and family.